Welcome to Horn. This is a lecture for the teaching modules of the One Health Regional Network, Horn project. This lecture forms part of the Tier 2 Generic and Transferable Skills Curriculum programme. My name is Marie McIntyre and I work on the epidemiology of human and animal disease at the University of Liverpool in the United Kingdom. The subject of this lecture is peer review of research. Peer review is a process by which a scholarly work is checked by a group of experts in the same field to make sure it meets the necessary standards before it is published. It should be a positive step in the process of publishing research. There are several myths about peer review. Its only purpose is to decide whether to accept an item. The decision about whether to publish a paper is just a vote of peer reviewers. Actually, editors also consider other factors, such as the reasons given by the peer reviewers and the amount of space in the journal. Peer reviewers only focus on weaknesses. Actually, reviewers also mention strengths of the item they're reviewing. This information helps editors and it encourages authors. Actually, another important purpose of peer review is to obtain suggestions that will improve and make the research better before publication. So a peer review investigates whether your research is interesting, important, whether the methodology is sound, whether the conclusions are original, and finally, whether the research is sound overall. But who's involved in the process? Authors, the editor, associate editors, reviewers, and the publisher themselves. So how do these people work together within the peer review process? You as an author write and submit your paper and it goes to the editor, who then usually assigns it to a sub-editor who is likely to have a better understanding of your field. They send it out, usually to at least 2 reviewers who return at least 1 review each. The editor or sub-editor might also review the manuscript and make comments. Then you make changes to your manuscript based on these reviews, and it may or may not go back to reviewers another time or more if necessary for further changes to be suggested and then made. Finally, once the sub-editor and reviewers are happy that the manuscript is as good as it can be, it is returned to the editor for a final decision to be made on whether to publish it. The editor can decide to accept the paper. They can ask for minor or major revisions, which is the back and forth after review process. They can reject the paper, and this might happen without it having been sent out to be reviewed in the first place. It might be rejected by the editor because they don't feel it fits with the journal at the first stage. Or finally, they can suggest that the manuscript is commuted to another journal within the publication family. So, the editor-in-chief has the first and last say on the outcome of the manuscript. They will ask a series of questions, with those emboldened the most important, including: is the topic appropriate to their journal? Would this topic be of interest to their readership? Would this topic make a significant contribution to the literature? Does the manuscript follow the formatting rules for this journal? Is the language of publication quality? Are the figures of publication quality? And then in some journals, you can actually contact the editor-in-chief to see if your manuscript is appropriate before submitting, using a pre-submission inquiry. For example, if the journal hasn't previously published in your area, it could be worth a quick email to check that the submission is appropriate. The associate editor will ask similar but more refined questions about your manuscript, including: is the topic appropriate to the journal? Would this topic be of interest to their readership? Would this topic make a significant contribution to the literature? Is the quality high enough to send out to peer review? They find an interface with experts to find potential reviewers. And again, you can communicate with this person to see if your manuscript is appropriate before submitting, if you have a query not covered in journal guidance. Reviewers. The reviewers are usually anonymous to you. The questions they ask form the basis of critical appraisal. These include: is the study design appropriate for the question being asked? Has the data been collected well? Are the results presented in a useful manner in terms of presenting raw data or summarising data? Has the existing literature been adequately summarised and results compared? Are the conclusions robust? Is this good and interesting research? The reviewers undertake the critical appraisal process, as we have described in the earlier subparts of this topic. So why should you act as a peer reviewer and undertake a peer review of someone else's manuscript? It can help you to stay current within your research field. It can help you to maintain and build your critical appraisal skills. It enhances your curriculum vitae, your CV. It provides you with experience when you become a scientific journal editorial board member or editor. You can sometimes receive an honorarium, particularly if the peer review is for a grant proposal. And it creates a sense of service within research. When should you agree to undertake a peer review? You should only agree to undertake a peer review if you have enough time to do a good job by the deadline, if you have sufficient expertise in the subject matter, if you have no conflicts of interest and can provide a fair review. For example, if you're asked to review a paper from somebody who you're in direct competition with, then it might be better not to provide a review response. Remember, an item being peer-reviewed is confidential. Do not discuss it with anyone. Do not show it to anyone without the editor's written permission. You can undertake informal as well as formal peer reviews using the same criteria. Typical sections of a peer review report include questions about setting the scene of the research. Things like, is the subject addressed in this article worthy of investigation? Is the information presented new? Are the conclusions supported by the data? Is the manuscript appropriate for the journal? Is the organisation of the manuscript appropriate? And are the figures, tables and supplementary data appropriate? And the answers to these might be that you would strongly agree, disagree, you're not quite sure, you think this manuscript is valuable, you agree or strongly agree. And you don't need all of the answers to be that you strongly agree. This is a balance. The choice of whether you think it's appropriate for the article to be published is a balance. You also provide confidential comments to the editor or editors, sub-editors, and comments which can be shared with the authors. And it's these comments which the author will then respond to. Finally, you provide a recommendation on acceptance, which is one of the earlier recommendations I mentioned. Many journals now require peer reviews to follow the COPE ethical guidelines for peer reviewers, and I've provided a link. Generally, when reviewing, don't tell the authors whether you consider the paper publishable. This is a comment you make to the editor because they may not agree with you. Begin the comments for authors by noting general strengths and limitations. Authors are human beings. Be tactful and try to be kind in your responses. Then provide section by section comments, including on typos. Don't correct writing in detail. Say what's good about the work and tell the author how to improve it. Nothing else. No freestanding criticisms. Specify items you comment on by page, paragraph and line if line numbers are provided. Use the review as a chance to educate the authors, help to build strength and minimise weaknesses within the work. Check that all the content seems logical, and if not, see if you can make suggestions to improve it or question what is missing so that it becomes more logical. Some specific questions you should ask yourself during a review include, for the title, does the title accurately reflect the content of the paper? Is it clear and concise? If not, can you make suggestions for how to improve it? For the abstract, Is the abstract sufficiently informative? Is the content of the abstract consistent with that of the paper? Again, make suggestions if you can think of ways of improving it. For the introduction, does the introduction provide sufficient background? Do you understand what the paper is about from the introduction? Does it clearly identify the research question or hypothesis or hypotheses? For the materials and methods, are the methods appropriate to the question? Are they well described in sufficient detail? If not, what is missing? What would help you to understand what has been undertaken within the work? You should also ask further questions, including for the results. Are they described in appropriate detail? Do they seem credible? Is the text consistent with any tables and figures? Are all the tables and figures needed, or do you need to include some more tables and figures? Could they be improved, and if so, how? For the discussion, is the discussion clear and focused? Are the conclusions consistent with the findings? Does the discussion adequately address items such as the study limitations, anomalies in the findings, relationships to previous research, theoretical implications, and practical implications? For the references, do all the references seem appropriate to include? Should any additional items be cited? Do the references appear to be accurate? As an author, you need to remember that rejection is common, particularly in important journals. Journal staff want to make sure your work is presented as clearly as possible. They are not out to get you, and the criticisms you receive are to improve your work. It's not just a criticism. Peer review should provide you with positive suggestions for how to improve your work. Make a note of deadlines and try and submit in advance of those deadlines. Anything other than a rejection means that your work, with extra work, may be able to be published. It can be very disheartening, particularly as a junior researcher, when things are rejected, but people are trying to be helpful. And equally, if you're undertaking peer review, be as helpful as you can when making suggestions. This makes work more likely to be published. Finally, you don't have to agree with all the comments made by reviewers, but if you don't agree with those comments, you need to explain why not and justify why you're not going to make changes based on those comments. If you want to receive the most positive outcome for peer review that you can, then do your literature search first. If you're uncertain about the worthiness of your manuscript for publication, then email the editor and ask for an opinion. Follow the journal formatting instructions exactly. There's nothing more irritating as an editor or sub-editor or reviewer than having to correct things that the author should have been able to sort out themselves. Use every tool at your disposal to ensure that proper language, English or any other language, is used. Have colleagues review your paper for you prior to submission. That can help a lot. This is an example of a peer review letter. And as you can see, it has the normal kind of header for a letter. And then it says, before we can proceed further, we'd like you to address the comments at the end of this letter or in a separately submitted document and resubmit your manuscript. This is a fairly standard set of comments. These are examples of a peer review response letter and the accompanying point-by-point response. These two documents can also be presented as a single document to accompany your revised manuscript and final version of figures and tables. When reviewing grant proposals, which are slightly different to manuscripts for publication, it is useful to consider the importance of the proposed work, the consistency of the proposed work with the granting agency's goals, the suitability of the methods, the feasibility of the timeline. Can what the proposers suggest realistically be achieved during the proposed time period? The qualifications of the staff, the adequacy of the facilities, this is physical resources that are available to undertake the proposed research, and the appropriateness of the budget. Is it actually likely that the researchers can undertake the work they're talking about using the budget they've suggested they need. I would like to acknowledge AuthorAid for some of the content within these slides. Please now go back to view the assessment and evaluation exercise from within the introductory section of this lecture.